Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here to talk about the kind of do's and don'ts of responding to disinformation, which you likely have been seeing a lot of and are going to see more of in the next week, likely months to come. So, the golden rule that we tell everybody here is to never amplify disinformation. And this can be one of the trickiest parts of countering disinformation on social media because the way that we interact with content actually helps determine how far something spreads. So, our attention and clicks and shares are literally currency for these platforms, and their business model is to keep our attention. And importantly, platforms don't distinguish between positive and negative engagement. So any engagement, even if it is to scream about how wrong something is going to push it farther. So as a general rule, you don't want to like, comment, share content that you don't want to spread further, even if it is to debunk it. Instead, the goal is to spend your energy rewarding your own trusted and local messengers to push that content further. So, when you come across something that you need a response plan for, there are 3 points of consideration that you're going to want to think through, and we will go through each of these in a little bit more detail. But first, you'll want to consider reach to think about whether some claim or narrative that you're seeing is reaching outside of an echo chamber and into the types of places where it could change people's views and cause harm. Second, you'll want to consider how much it matters if something does get out of an echo chamber and whether it shifts the offline situation in any way. And then you'll want to think about your kind of menu of response options, which we will go through, and which one is most appropriate for that level of reach and impact. So when we talk about reach at Drive Agency, we like to use this breakout scale, which was created by a researcher named Ben Nemo when he was at Graphica. And so this version was updated by Dewey Digital. And when we send out kind of reports from my agency, we use the scale just to have everyone kind of in the same language. So this is a 6 point scale, but we really think of it in terms of high, medium, and low. And so levels 1 and 2 are low reach categories, meaning they're pretty contained and they're only showing up on one platform or one specific network across a couple platforms. So only gun rights advocates, only anti-vaxxers, and in this case, only, election disinformation spaces, but are not super widespread. Levels 3 and 4 are medium, which typically means that they are widespread across the right-wing ecosystem, but maybe not really breaking into the mainstream. So level 3 is for things that are spread through right-wing social media. 4A is when things have jumped into broadcast, radio, TV. People often ask where Fox News goes, and we put it in 4A here. Levels 4B and 5 are high reach. So 4B is when mainstream outlets are helping to push something further. So that could be whether it's your hometown paper, NPR, New York Times, mainstream cable news is getting involved and either accidentally repeating these, kind of both sidesing the framing and pushing the narratives further. And then 5 is for anything that has pretty much left the realm of politics and is now showing up all across society, social media, often from non-political people and celebrities who don't normally get involved with political messaging. And it's just important to note that something can be super low on the breakout scale, but still cause really harmful offline narratives. So just because something is low doesn't mean it's not scary, and just because something high doesn't mean that you need to respond to it. So looking at impact, we again think of impact in high, medium, and low categories based on these 3 factors of severity, timing, and directness. So severity is looking at how big of an impact we expect, which can be subjective, but y'all know your audiences and what will move them. Timing, we will respond differently to things, whether it's something in the next few days or this is contributing to a longer term decline in trust in certain institution. And then audiences, we don't think of kind of impact on audiences in just one metric. We want to make it clear that different groups will be impacted differently by different threats. And so it's just important to think about who is impacted in what ways. And so at this point, if you're assessing a new threat, you'll have a sense of how widespread something is and how it might be impacting the different communities that you care about. And so we've gone through reach, impact, and now we want to think about the best ways to respond. And so that gives us basically three categories of response options based on how we put together those three things. So first, the most high level option, most intense, often the first thing people think of is a direct response. And you really only want to do this in a way where your weighing in carries very little risk of you exposing more people to a harmful narrative. So again, first rule is do no harm. Often the more direct your response is, the more risky it is. It could give something more attention. It loses effect over time. It maybe doesn't reach as many people. So use this one very few and far between. So direct action is pretty high risk. So let's talk a little bit about what indirect action looks like. So this is a way to respond where you're still trying to address a claim, but not doing it in a way that directly responds to the bad actor or amplifies the harmful claim itself. So it can be a little trickier, but it minimizes the risks that come along with that direct response. So types of indirect responses include inoculation, which is taking action ahead of time to give people a sense of what is coming without directly holding a microphone to the bad stuff. Media literacy is really important. Understanding how to think critically about what you see, especially thinking about things like AI, can really help. And research does show that basic accuracy prompts can be very effective. Counter messaging, we will talk about this more on the next slide, but bypassing a false claim with your own messaging. And logic corrections can be really helpful when you are undermining the source of a claim so that people decide for themselves that they don't trust what they see. So this is done by spotlighting motives, networks, and tactics by bad actors rather than fact checking someone and saying you're wrong. So a good format for counter messaging is this truth sandwich. And so a lot of people are familiar with this. It comes from a linguist named George Lakoff, who talks about how our brains remember what we hear first and most often. So you can bring that concept into your messaging by starting and ending with positive and proactive messaging and disrupting the disinformation in the middle. So the bad stuff is not what is most memorable from your message. And so we work with a group called the Truth Brigade, who has developed their own take on this called the Truth Sandwich. And so when we do truth sandwiches, we want to start with a positive message, laying some common ground that establishes yourself as a trusted messenger. And then second, you want to disrupt the harmful claim. And again, this typically will focus on a logic correction rather than fact correction and, explicitly stating a false claim here. And then third, you want to end on a positive note with the message that people should be taking away from the topic, a proactive message. And I do want to just touch really quickly on responding to manipulated media in this crazy era of AI, which is so much more complex and sophisticated than it was even in 2020 and will get more complex. So first and foremost, it is crucial to recognize that our intuition to share sensational content and intriguing content can lead us astray. And again, the first rule that we advocate is simple. Do not share it with your network. I will continue to repeat that. The spread of manipulated media can have far-reaching consequences, and it will just spread things further. And while it might be tempting to try to debunk this content ourselves, pretty much we advise against it unless it is blatantly obvious through common sense. Attempting to identify deepfakes yourself or manipulated content can be counterproductive. Firstly, tools for accurately detecting such content are not really widely available yet or reliable. They sometimes miss content. This picture on the right here is a picture that a journalist ran through leading AI image detectors, and all of them confirmed that this image of Bigfoot is real. So not super reliable. And additionally, attempting to debunk these things ourselves, we kind of inadvertently set a norm that it is on the burden of the user to, detect false images, and this is not sustainable or an effective norm to set. Places pressure on the public, and it can lead to confusion and mistrust. And so instead, we encourage everyone to lean on trusted sources, networks of information. In this era of misinformation, it is more important than ever to foster communities and alliances that are grounded in mutual trust. And so it's also important to acknowledge that media literacy is not a catch-all solution. While it can be invaluable. So the belief that being savvy about media can single-handedly solve this issue of misinformation really underestimates the complexity of the problem. So the ideal approach combines media literacy with technical solutions that, as I said, don't really fully exist yet. And really, really, really at the bottom of it, it's enforcing regulatory measures that hold creators and distributors of deepfakes accountable and holding our platforms more accountable. And this third bucket of responding is the easiest technically, but it can feel really hard to do, and that sometimes is just to do nothing. This obviously carries no risk of amplification, and it works best when you aren't super worried about impact. You can still take some action behind the scenes with your own messengers, flagging something to a group like Drive, thinking about what your response would be if you see this get more traction. But mostly this is kind of the wait and see approach. And honestly, we land here a lot of the time when we see false claims, but it is really important to monitor them to see when they get, into response territory. It can be really hard to do nothing, but there is real value in spending your time doing the things that you do best and have an impact that way instead of responding to crazy things. And finally, responses are often going to lead to hard discussions. And so just some quick tips for having hard discussions over the next couple weeks. Be civil, ask questions. Finding common ground is always important. Offering both fact and logic corrections is really helpful. And in that logic correction, respond more to what people mean than what they say, what that root of what they're worried about is. And again, pick your battles and be patient. And regardless of specific tactics that you go with, the ultimate goal here is not necessarily to force more truth and facts out there into the void, but to build more trust. And that's because our brains determine truth based on who we trust. And so that means we just need to think about how to use the social media world to build and reinforce trust as much as we do about how to fact check and inoculate. So when you're thinking about building trust on social media, we want to think about things like, how are we making people feel like they're being heard? How do we come across as reliable, relatable, authentic? And how do we make sure people hear from us often enough to trust us?